Hello, everyone. My name is Tori Fugate, and I am the Director of Communications for Shelter Animals Count, which is now a program of the ASPCA. And I'm really excited today to be presenting to you our 2025 annual data report. This video is just going to be a very quick synopsis of some of the high-level trends that we saw throughout the year in our 2025 report that was just released. And this is just going to go over some of those key details, the analysis and trends that our team was able to see in this year's report. Our report this year, we also featured a lot of new animal level data, which is data that we receive thanks to our APIs that we have through various shelter software partners. And this animal level data tracks an animal's journey from intake to outcome. And we see all the details in between. So this looks at dog size, dog age, cat ages with intake, proportion with org types, all sorts of great details that we threw in throughout this report. So let's go ahead and dive in. And first thing that was really exciting for us this year at Shelter Animals Count is that since we have been established in 2012, we have been collecting and analyzing data now for 10 years. So we started collecting data in 2016, and we were able to analyze and see now 10 years of data, which we were really excited to put into this report. You'll see through this part of the report how intakes and adoptions were impacted over the last 10 years, what that adoption rate has looked like for both dogs and cats, as well as the non-live outcome rate as a percent of total intakes. And what's really interesting for dogs is that in 2016, we saw the non-live outcome rate was at a 10.4%. And then that it went down as we got near the COVID pandemic to 5.8 in 2020 and has since gone back up to the same rate that we saw 10 years ago. For cats, we saw again the same dip in community intakes over the course of 10 years with that 2020 dip when we went through the COVID-19 pandemic. And then the cat non-live outcome rate has been really interesting to look at because it started out as 21% when we started collecting and analyzing data. It really went down when we hit the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic at 10.5% and has since stabilized. In 2025. It ended at 11.1%. We're going to go into more details about what non-live outcomes and adoption rates and everything looked like in 2025 throughout this video. When we looked at community intakes, so community intakes are all intakes minus transfers. So that just prevents us from double counting animals. This is more of a reflection of what is happening in your community. We saw a total community intake of 5.8 million animals in 2025. That was down 2% compared to 2024. When we looked at month-over-month patterns for dogs and cats combined, we saw the same seasonal patterns that we typically see each year with that big spike towards the spring and summer months, and then it stabilizes more and declines as we get into the fall and winter months. But 2025 numbers were consistently lower, especially in the first part of the year compared to 2024. Adoptions, we saw a slight increase this year, a very slight increase. It was 4.2 million animals overall were adopted, which was a 0.7% increase over 2024. This helped with live outcomes overall. With that decline in intakes that we saw, seeing this little adoption boost really helped us to see more live outcomes this year and just helped balance that out. Then we went into animal level data in this report, which was really exciting to be able to dive into what adoptions look like from the animal level data for adoptions. Dogs by size is always a really interesting data point to look at. 41% of dogs that were adopted this year or this past year were medium-sized dogs. So that's anywhere from 25 to 60-pound dogs were the majority of the adoptions, followed by small dogs under 25 pounds at 36%, and then large dogs that were 61 pounds or more made up 23% of adoptions. More organization type data was included throughout this report. In this section, we combined all kittens that were under 8 weeks into one category. So this was, again, at their age of intake, the proportion of adoptions that happened by those ages. And then we broke that out into org types. And so you'll see in this chart that government shelters made up 28% of kitten adoptions, but rescues only made up 9%. And we see rescues adopting out 50% more the juveniles, so that 8-week to 5-month age. And then adults were the significant majority for most of the organization types. So those are 5 months to 7-year-old adult cats made up a really large portion of adoptions by org type. Non-live outcomes, we featured a little bit more data this year than we have in the past. And so we totaled 757,000 animals that experienced a non-live outcome. So that's shelter euthanasia, died in care, or lost in care, which was a slight decrease overall. But when we broke that out into species, we saw where these differences really made up. So dog non-live outcomes decreased, which was continuing a positive trend that we saw from 2024, while cat non-live outcomes rose slightly. This is really reflective when we look at the animal level data, that this really impacts more of those neonate, weaned kittens, the younger, more fragile kittens, and then older cats as well. And when we look at how those non-live outcomes broke down, for dogs, shelter euthanasia made up 90% of those non-live outcomes, while died and lost in care made up 10. Cats, we see a significant difference here, with shelter euthanasia making up 64% and 36% either died or were lost in care. And again, that is really coming down to what the breakdown is with age groups. So we do see more non-live outcomes with those more fragile kittens. And then we even broke this out for cats by non-live outcomes by age. And you can see how this really broke down, with neonates making up 29%. With those weaned kittens, that's anywhere from 4 to 8, where they're weaning off of formula and eating more solid food. That's at 21%. Juveniles made up 15%, with adults at 25%. Seniors were the last category at 10. When we looked at transfers, this has been a really interesting category to look at over the last few years, because transfer activity has fluctuated quite a bit. And when we looked at 2025 data, we saw that transfers into shelters and rescues increased by 3%, reaching 1.3 million animals, while transfers out decreased by 1% compared to 2024. And then we broke down even in this category by transfers by organization type. We broke it out by the top transfer in states and transfer out states. So go look at this data. It's very interesting. We're going to keep looking at transfer data as a whole, because this is a really interesting area, especially to look at over the last 10 years and see this analysis. And new for our 2025 year-end report, we featured this in our mid-year report for last year. We were really excited to dive into the annual data for return to owner outcomes. So this is, again, a really big topic right now within the industry of what's going on with RTOs, as we call them. So return to owners declined by 3%, with 638,000 animals being returned to their families in 2025. Was a really interesting tidbit of information in this one, that stray dogs were about 6 times more likely to be returned to their owners than cats. And we really looked at, how those species breakdowns happened within this report. We also looked at what the national RTO rate is and how that breaks down with our stray intakes, and how that breaks down by organization type. And we looked at government shelters and shelters with government contracts. Those are the primary means of animals going back to their families. Nationally, 19% of all dog intakes resulted in an RTO, compared to 3% of cat intakes. And when we looked at stray animals, which is the intake type most commonly associated with reunification, 34% of dogs and 6% of cats were returned to their owners. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you so much for taking the time to read our 2025 annual report. There is so much information in this report. It is 30 plus pages full of data for you to be able to understand the ins and outs of what's happening in our shelters and rescues across the country. And speaking of them, I want to say thank you to those shelters and rescues that participate with Shelter Animals Count and contribute your data each month. There are so many great opportunities, if you are not contributing data, for you to join us, and you have access to amazing member benefits portal access, where you can see how your organization really fits in with the national story with comparative dashboards. You can see your intakes and outcomes very easily. There's so much information and so much great data that is within our portal that you have access to as a contributing member. So if you're not contributing data to us, we would love to have you. Along with our 2025 annual data report, our two main dashboards on our website, our National Animal Statistics Dashboard and our state level dashboard, have both been updated to reflect 2025 data. So you now have 10 years of data available on those dashboards that you now have access to. And this also does include now US territories. There's so much great information coming from us at Shelter Animals Count. We're really excited for what the year holds, especially now that we're a program of the ASPCA. There's so many great new opportunities, so many resources coming your way. We're really excited to be able to continue to share this great data with you, and looking forward to another year of data and transparency within animal welfare in 2026.